What's up guys, this is Toby and this is the Darkglass Electronics Anagram. We are going to make a tone from scratch using parallel processing and the two lanes that it has, and we're going to get into what it's all about. First off, here's a riff. So what is the Anagram? The Anagram is Darkglass Electronics' new multi-effects bass pedal. I've seen a lot of buzz about this online, probably the most I've seen in recent times about new bass gear coming out, so I'm super keen to get into it. The cool thing about the Anagram is that you can split the tone up into two lanes. You can swipe down and there's another lane available there. You can send splits down there, and what this means is that you can have parallel processing. And if you don't know what parallel processing is, it's a very powerful thing that you can do to specifically bass guitar, but also other instruments. But for bass, when you split the chain up and process it twice in two different ways, it means you can separate the sub frequencies into its own channel or your own track, or in this case its own lane, which means you can then process it entirely uniquely compared to the other part of the tone. It's a very common process for any modern rock or metal mixers to split the sub frequencies into its own track, to isolate them, to control them, to keep them clean. It just allows for so much more flexibility and dynamic in the actual bass tone when you have that solid foundation. So this is what parallel processing is really sick for when it comes to bass, and that's what's kind of game changing about this pedal, is the fact that you can do that all within the pedal and get a sound that is super close to the studio vibe. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna make a tone from scratch using the split and doing a parallel bass tone. Let's go. So let's dive into it. I'm gonna open up a blank preset. We're gonna be in preset mode and in chain mode, which means we can see every single block here. So first up, what we're gonna do is we're going to split the signal into this parallel processing, get that out of the way first as a good foundation. So we go into there, utilities, split. We're doing that in the second block up here because we're going to put a noise gate ahead of everything, because we want to gate the low end and the main tone the same amount, just to keep it cohesive and also to not use up too many blocks. So let's get that in there. So that's in there now. And then also in the split, what we want to do is we want to reconnect up the chain. We're going to do it all the way at the end so we can use all the blocks, and basically we're going to process both of these signals differently and bring them back together at the end and then have it come out one output. So let's go back up here. We're going to do utilities and we're going to do merge. So as you can see there, what we've done is we've gone all the way across that bottom row all the way to the end, and has allowed us to have the flexibility to bring our tone out into the subs and then back up into the main tone. We're also going to leave this blank space here at the end so we can add a gain knob. Let me add that now. Basically so we can turn up the whole tone as one after the fact. So let's go to the subtone. So down on this second line, we're going to start this sub track, and the goal here is to isolate the frequencies from about 20 hertz to anywhere down from 300 hertz to like 150 hertz. So to get there, we're going to do three little steps. What I like to do is I like to add an EQ at the start. I want to accentuate those low frequencies and bring them up in volume. So I'm going to just do a little bit of a boost there because the tone ends up being quite clean. This is what the tone sounds like, literally as DI. Sounds chill. If we turn this on, pretty similar because we have not done much processing. Hopefully you felt the low end be a bit stronger. So let's go into here. We're going to now add a low pass and a high pass, right? So let's first off add a high pass, which I'm just going to keep that at literally about 25 hertz because I just did a big shelf up and I want to make sure those super sub frequencies are not too messed up. Let's make that slope a -12 as well. And now let's add a low pass. So to isolate these sub frequencies, let's turn these down all the way down to about, let's go about 300. Right now we can still hear this top one. I'm just going to isolate those so we can really focus on what this sounds like. I'm going to turn down the level of row 1, so now we can only hear row 2. So now that's just those sub frequencies. We will turn that back up after the fact, just to make sure that we can make this all clean. So we can make the frequencies maybe a little bit lower there. Yeah, that's cool. Let's put it at a -12 slope as well. So now we basically are only hearing the frequencies from 25.9 hertz to 242 hertz. Cool. Low frequencies. That's all we got. That's our sub track. A few more steps to this. We kind of want to squish the crap out of it with some compression and some limiting to make sure the dynamics are a bit more tighter, so our low notes and our high notes are a bit closer together. This is a very common thing to do with the sub track, as it just works so well on those low frequencies and make them sound very consistent. But the key thing here is that means we don't have to slam the crap out of our main tone, and that can be a bit more open and a bit more dynamic because this one is so strong. Let's add a compressor. And what we got? Let's add the luminal, the FET compressor. This sounds great. Just honestly, with everything flat, I think they did it that way, so it sounds great just out of the box. So that's a bit of gentle compression going on already. Let's turn that on and off. Sounds cool. Let's add a limiter on here, which I love that they have limiters on here. They knew that we wanted to do this. Add a limiter on there afterwards. Let's make it a limiter, and the way to do that is to turn down the threshold all the way up to 100 to 1 or infinity, depending on what the vibe is. So hopefully what you're hearing is that it's very slammed and compressed. I'm kind of fine to leave it there. Those two stages of limiting and compression help bring it in rather than only having a compression or only having a limiter. These kind of help each other to bring it up and keep everything nice and tight. So honestly, on the sub track, that's kind of chill for the moment. I'm pretty happy with that. The only other thing I want to add is a gain knob, just so that we can have the workflow of breaking out where we're going to turn up the volume. We could easily turn it up on the output gain on the limiter, but I like to have it as its own knob so I know that that's exactly where the gain is being added. So let's go and add utility gain, right? So we can turn that up and down as we go. Cool. So let's now build the main tone. So in the split, let's turn back up row 1, and we're actually going to turn down row 2. So now we're just hearing the main sound. Cool. DI sound. Let's add some stuff to it. So let's add a B7K or B3K, which is the same as a B7K. I love this sound. It always sounds gorgeous. That works right out the bat, even though there's no cab going on. It's literally just the pedal. It just is a great sound. So I like to crank the drives a little bit more, and honestly, that blend there is pretty decent. We don't need to do too much of that right now. We need to get everything more in context before we start messing with that. So after this B3K, we're going to add some compression to the tone just to even it out a little bit. Not going to slam it, just to even it out just a little bit and make us basically sound like we're playing a little bit better. Let's add in the luminal FET compressor. Again, we're just going to run this flat, ratio of 4 to 1. Turn that off. Decently similar. Just like the tone is now, like, rather than being out here, we just brought it in just a little bit, making it a little bit tighter, just with those peaks and troughs of the low end and also the high plucks. So let's add a cab into the chain now. We're going to go to the next block, click add, go to amps and cabs. We can scroll across. There's all these options for cabs. We're going to select this first one here. Cool. So it's loaded up with a mark bass. We can scroll through and find all these other ones. There's, I think, one based off of Fender, Orange Amps, Mesa, Ampeg, all these awesome things. We're going to go to the classic Darkglass cab. There's the 2x12 and the 4x10 Darkglass cabs, we're going to go to the 2x12 Darkglass cab. So now it sounds like this. A lot darker, there's no DI signal going on there. Now it's kind of more rounded out, like a more normal bass sound. We've got all these options for microphones as well. We've got a bunch of condensers. This is a pretty good one. A little bit of a kick mic on there, the 112. But what I like to do for this, because we got that sub track, we can actually get a little less low end from this main bass sound. So we don't have to use like a kick mic, which is a very common popular thing. We can actually use something like this one over here, a Dynamic 7, which looks like it's based off the SM7B, which is exactly what this microphone is. This one sounds a bit more like this. A little bit brighter, a little bit more mid-rangey. If you combine this with a kick mic, it sounds pretty good. But for this purpose, we've got that sub track. That is all of our sub information that the kick mics might be providing for us. So nice, good, strong mid-range and top end is what we want from this. We can change the positions. So we're going to scroll all the way down and we're going to go to edge off axis, which means it will be based around the edge of the cone and then off axis, kind of like, again, how this microphone is facing towards my mouth. On axis will be straight at me. Off axis is slightly to the side. And the really cool thing about this is there's a blend feature within this block, which means you can get a bit of that DI sound back in. And it's almost like, if you're able to have these blend knobs, which you have a blend knob within the cab stage, you also have a blend knob in the B3K stage, which means all of a sudden you have even more parallel processing going on within these individual blocks, which is honestly sick. Same within the compression, there's a blend knob there. All this parallel stuff going on, it's awesome on bass. Let's just turn this down a little bit to get a little bit more top end in the sound. Let's turn that back up. Cool. So if we turn that down even further. So that's quite a bit brighter, which is sick. It's almost like you're EQing more top end into the sound in a bit more of a unique way than just turning it up on EQ. I like to have it just a little bit under. So let's go to about 90% blend. Now that we've got the B3K and the compressor and the cab, we're now going to add some EQ to get it closer to a studio tone or a stage ready tone. So let's just clean up the sound a little bit. We're just going to do a little bit of molding as if the tone is kind of clay. So we're going to 250 hertz. I don't really like that. If we turn that up, it's not the most pleasant sounding thing. It's adding a bit of mud. So let's clean up some mud there. Same with some 500 hertz. Let's get rid of a bit of that. Same with 1K, just a little bit less. Now we've kind of darkened it a bit because we've gotten rid of a bit of that honky mid-range and that mud. Let's add a bit of brightness to it. So we want our sound to kind of cut through. So, and hopefully you can actually see the shape of that. We're kind of doing a little bit of a smiley face thing, but it's nothing too crazy. The most crazy thing is going to be this top end shelf and this 3K, really adding the clarity, and it depends on what bass tone you're doing or where you're sitting in the mix. These can go up, a few dB up or down depending on what mix you're in, or if you're playing with guitars, or if you're playing, just a bass solo. This stuff is all completely mixed contextual about where this sits. This feels pretty good to me. Pretty decent up there, but it can shift around depending on your context. I'm going to add another EQ. This time I'm going to use a different EQ. Just do a little bit more finessing, because I think EQ is really what allows your bass to sit in the mix properly and not be intrusive. I suppose it's like writing a bass part. You want to write stuff that really fits the song and adds to the songwriting, but isn't intrusive to, everyone else's creation to the song. Similar to EQ, if we want to nestle in there, we do want to carve out a bit to make sure that we aren't messing with, the drums or the guitar or the vocal, which also allows us to do a little bit more and be a little bit more creative with some notes, because we are kind of in the right space. So now you might think I'm crazy, but we're going to do a bit more of the same, just to carve out a little bit more. So 200 hertz, just down a bit, 400 hertz, just down a bit, and 800 hertz, just down a bit. And then also 1.6K down a bit. And then we're going to boost 3.2 just a bit more. So we turn all this off. These are all pretty subtle EQ moves, or maybe you could say they're drastic if you add them up together, but it's all about mix context. And these kind of moves are things that I've found work in my mix and work with my tone. I want the sound to be quite mid-range heavy, but I also want it to be bright. So this high mids is where it shines quite nicely, and the mid-range is so prominent on, for one, this bass, and two, on the Darkglass cab and the B3K, that we do need to clean that up a little bit, or it's going to be incredibly nasty, and we want it to be just nasty, but in like a kind of pleasant way. So these EQ moves help. So the next step is we're going to add a high pass filter to get rid of some of those super low frequencies that might interfere with our subtrack. So if we go to dynamics and we add a high pass filter, after all this, now that we can do this, we can bring this up to about 100 Hertz. Get that out of the way of those sub frequencies. Turn that off. Cool, so it's a bit cleaner. Now you're like, this doesn't really sound that bassy. This is why we got the subtrack. Now the subtrack has no distortion on it, it has no cab on it. It's going to be clean, it's pinned, it's got the compression and limiting. So let's go down there to our split. We're going to turn up row 2 back to neutral. What's really cool, if you click that button, turns it back to 0. So now that we've added the EQ and done a bit of sculpting to the tone, I want to go back to the B3K. So the grunt might be adding a bit of low mid kind of rumble, which is not necessarily a negative thing, but I just want to clean that up a bit. So let's turn that off. Cool. And let's turn up the tone. We just want some more brightness. It's not sounding bright enough for me. Let's go to about 8. Let's also bump up the blend. Let's go about 75. That's sounding pretty good. Let's turn up the level a bit there. Let's go to about 7. Cool, that's sounding pretty good. Now we can hear that top end, and I think the EQ really adds in the drive into the mix and means that we can have everything sounding a bit brighter rather than just cranking the drive, meaning that our plucks and our notes can have all that kind of aggression without just kind of fizzling out all those top end information little note things. So let's have a listen to this. Cool, let's also add the EQ back in. Cool, that really rounds it out. Honestly, I think the tone's kind of done. I'm pretty happy with that. Depending on our volume at the end of the day, we have this gain knob here if we need to turn it up or down, depending on the level that your front of house person wants it. And the noise suppressor at the start, it's kind of chill there. I don't like to cut it off too much because you want to still have your articulation of your, all these little plucks here. If you turn it up too much, it starts cutting that out. It just kind of cuts out the tone a bit. So again, I think Darkglass have done a great job here. All the preset settings for a lot of these things already sound great out of the bat. We've just done a little bit of finessing to get them to sound a bit stronger and a bit more, I guess, to the style of more modern metal or rock bass sound with a bit of distortion and separating that with the parallel processing of the sub track. Sick. So I'm like quite stoked with this tone. I'm actually going to use this on my band's next tour, and this will be available on the new update for the Anagram. If you download, this will be a preset on the pedal. So hopefully what you found out by this is how kind of easy and simple and yet complicated you can make a bass tone, but also how powerful that sub bass track can be in a studio or now in an actual pedal where you can bring that around with you wherever you play, is incredibly powerful in my opinion. It's exactly what I've been looking for because I do so much plug-in tone work, and now basically a little mini computer I can do that with. So I think that's super sick, and I would really encourage you to either try this parallel processing thing on bass if you have not tried that before, or this pedal. It's pretty damn sick, and a massive kudos to Darkglass for getting bass players excited again with this new piece of bass technology. Anyway guys, all the best. Peace out.